The Zen master stood tall, his eyes fixed on the young monk, Mark Katka. "Mark, you have lost your path," the master declared, his voice cutting through the quiet of the early morning temple. "Your search for meaning has led you astray." Mark's heart skipped a beat. His mind, so filled with confusion, couldn't grasp what the Zen master had just said. He had always thought his practice was sound, his intentions pure. But in this moment, doubt gnawed at him. The master, with his calm and serene demeanor, continued, "You seek answers in the wrong places. The truth you look for is not in the world outside, but in the silence within you." Mark, unable to comprehend, felt the weight of those words like a stone pressing against his chest. His entire being trembled as the world he had built around his faith began to collapse. The temple, so sacred and full of wisdom, felt like a prison. Mark looked up, his gaze desperate, seeking the comfort of the master's reassurance. Yet all he received was silence. The Zen master turned away, leaving Mark standing there, alone with his thoughts. "You must find your own way, Mark." The master's words lingered in the air, like a final echo before the door closed behind him. Mark stood frozen in the courtyard, the words of the Zen master echoing in his mind. "I've lost my path," he repeated, trying to understand the full weight of what had been said. His knees trembled, but he couldn't bring himself to kneel. He had devoted years to his practice, thinking that if he gave it his all, if he followed every rule, he would find peace. But now, in the silence that followed, everything felt wrong. He glanced around, but the temple, the one place he had always believed held the answers, seemed suddenly hollow. The soft chirping of birds in the distance only amplified his sense of isolation. It was as if the world around him was turning away, leaving him alone to confront his confusion. He clenched his fists, anger rising in his chest. Why couldn't he get this right? The doubt crept in like a dark cloud, shadowing his thoughts. The sound of footsteps approached, and Mark turned to find the mentor, the Zen master's quiet presence looming behind him. The master's words were simple. To find your true path, you must let go of the one you've created. Mark could not yet comprehend what that meant. All he knew was that the world he thought he understood was slipping through his fingers. The Zen master approached Mark with deliberate steps, his presence calm yet imposing. "You seek too much," the master said quietly. Mark's heart pounded. "I'm trying to understand. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." The words tumbled out, his voice betraying his desperation. He wanted to explain, wanted the master to see his commitment, but the master's eyes, serene and knowing, only met his with a soft silence. "It is not about trying," the Zen master replied. "It is about being. You must unlearn what you have learned." Mark felt the sting of those words like a slap. Unlearn? What could he possibly unlearn? Everything he had done, every step he had taken, had been in pursuit of enlightenment. Was it all wrong? The world he had known, the very fabric of his reality, seemed to unravel with each passing moment. The master's calm gaze, though, remained unwavering. "Let go of your attachment to what you think you know," he said, his voice as steady as the stillness around them. Mark's frustration grew. What was this? A lesson? A riddle? He felt the crushing weight of uncertainty on his chest, and his mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. But in that moment, the only thing he could hold on to was the master's steady gaze, the gaze that seemed to pierce through him. Mark walked aimlessly, his mind a whirlpool of questions. Let go of what you know. How could he do that? The teachings, the practices, the rituals, they had been his guide for so long. He had believed that if he followed them, peace would come. But peace had never arrived. Instead, the emptiness inside of him grew, gnawing away at his soul. The path he had thought was certain now seemed like a fog, thick and disorienting. As he walked down the long stone path in the temple's garden, the sound of his footsteps echoed, each one heavier than the last. He felt the weight of his doubts with every step. Am I even capable of change? He stopped and sat on a large stone bench, staring down at his hands. They were the same hands that had once held the sacred scrolls, that had once moved in precise meditative motions. But now they seemed foreign to him, disconnected from his true self. The sound of the wind rustling the bamboo around him broke his thoughts, and he closed his eyes trying to find stillness. But the more he tried to focus, the more chaotic his thoughts became. Nothing felt right. "What am I doing here?" he muttered to himself. The mentor, ever watchful, approached him once more. "Mark, you cannot seek peace by trying to hold on to it," the master said, his voice carrying the weight of ages. Mark looked up, his face tired but filled with an unspoken plea. "But how do I let go? Everything I've done, every step I've taken, feels like it's all been in vain." The master stood silent for a moment, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, filling the space between them. Finally, he spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "Peace is not something you find outside of yourself. It is something you uncover within. But you must let go of your attachments to the idea of what it should be." Mark looked at the master, his heart heavy. He had always believed that peace would come if he followed the rules, if he practiced hard enough. But now the idea of peace felt intangible, elusive. He didn't know how to proceed. He didn't know how to let go of everything he thought he understood. But in the mentor's eyes, Mark saw the faintest glimmer of hope, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt the faintest stir of trust that maybe, just maybe, he could find the peace he so desperately sought. Mark sat in meditation, his mind drifting in chaotic waves. The teachings, once so clear, now seemed distant. "Why can't I focus?" he thought, frustration creeping in. He clenched his fists, trying to force the calm that was never there. Every breath seemed to pull him further away from peace, and the stillness felt foreign. His thoughts, once centered on the path, now wandered into the unknown. His inner turmoil felt like a storm, raging inside, pushing him further into confusion. "What's the point?" Mark thought, feeling the weight of the years he had spent seeking. Was he fooling himself all along? The quiet of the temple, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. Mark's mind flickered to the Zen master's words, but they felt like a distant echo, impossible to grasp. Every meditation brought him no closer to the stillness he longed for. It was as if the more he tried, the more elusive it became. The sound of footsteps broke Mark's concentration. He opened his eyes to see Jack, his fellow disciple, standing near the door. Jack, always calm and collected, watched him quietly. "You seem lost, Mark," Jack said, his voice calm yet filled with concern. Mark couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration at the words. "I am lost," Mark replied, his voice heavy with doubt. "Everything I thought I knew feels wrong." Jack stepped closer, offering a soft smile, but his eyes reflected an understanding that Mark didn't feel. "Maybe you need to let go of what you think you know," Jack suggested gently. Mark stared at him, the words hanging in the air like a riddle. Let go. How could he let go of everything he had worked for? "I don't know how," Mark admitted, feeling the weight of the truth in his chest. Jack nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for Mark to admit this. "It's not easy," Jack said. "But sometimes you have to stop searching and just be." Mark's eyes darted toward the floor, processing Jack's words. Could it really be that simple? Mark found himself walking in the temple gardens later that day, the words Jack had spoken lingering in his mind. Let go and just be. It felt like an impossible task, yet something about it felt right. The path ahead seemed blurry, and for the first time, Mark realized he had no idea where it led. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Shouldn't he be working harder? Shouldn't he be following the rules? Mark looked up at the ancient stone walls surrounding the temple, their presence solid and unyielding. It reminded him of the rigidity in his own life. He had been so focused on following the path, adhering to every rule, that he had forgotten to simply live. The weight of the pressure he had placed on himself began to sink in. Maybe the peace he was looking for wasn't in the effort, but in the surrender. Mark stopped walking, gazing at the simple beauty of the temple grounds, the moss-covered stones, the quiet flow of the stream, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to just be. The world didn't need to make sense in this moment. It just needed to exist. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Mark sat by the temple's fountain. The water gently rippled, mirroring the fading light. His thoughts drifted back to Jack's words. Just be. It was the first time Mark had heard those words in such a simple context. He had always believed that peace was something to be achieved, something that required effort. But now, in the stillness, he wondered if he had been mistaken all along. The journey he had embarked on was never about reaching a destination. It was about learning to accept what was already there. The soft sound of water flowing seemed to guide Mark into a state of deeper introspection. As he watched the water reflect the sky above, he felt the tension in his body begin to ease. Mark allowed his mind to wander freely, no longer trying to force clarity, no longer seeking something that was beyond his reach. For the first time, he felt the smallest hint of peace, not in his actions, but in his ability to simply sit and observe. Mark woke the next morning with a sense of lightness that had eluded him for weeks. As he stepped onto the temple grounds, he felt the quiet stillness of the place, the weight of his internal struggle gone. He still didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he felt okay with that. The search for peace had shifted from an external pursuit to an internal revelation. He didn't need to force himself to be perfect anymore. His journey wasn't about becoming something he wasn't. It was about accepting who he already was. As he walked through the temple gates, the sound of the birds in the trees, the rustling of the wind in the leaves, all felt different. They weren't distractions anymore. They were part of the same moment. Mark realized that peace was never something to be found. It was something to be recognized right here, right now. With a small smile, Mark walked onward, knowing the path was still ahead, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. Mark stood before the mentor, his fists clenched. "I've been meditating for hours, but I don't feel any closer to understanding," Mark said, frustration clouding his voice. The Zen master, unmoving and calm, met his gaze. "You are attached to the outcome, Mark," the master replied softly. "You want to feel progress, but that very desire pulls you further from the peace you seek." Mark shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "What do you mean? I've done everything you've asked. I've worked hard." The master paused. "Hard work alone won't bring enlightenment, Mark. It's about surrendering the need to control." The words cut deep, and Mark's chest tightened. "How can I surrender? It feels like everything I've worked for is slipping away." The master's expression softened. "You must let go, or you will drown in your desire for control." Mark's frustration bubbled over as he stormed away from the master's presence. "Why is it so difficult?" he muttered to himself. "Why can't I just let go?" He walked quickly through the temple courtyard, his footsteps echoing loudly in the quiet morning. The more he tried to push forward, the further he felt from peace. "What am I missing?" he thought, his mind clouded by doubt. He had followed every instruction, given everything he had, but the calm he longed for remained elusive. Mark stopped by the temple's stone fountain, his reflection distorted in the rippling water. "I can't do this," he whispered to the empty air. The weight of failure settled in his chest. The more he resisted, the more everything seemed to unravel. How could he ever find peace when his very efforts were tearing him apart? Later that day, Mark found himself in a meditation room, alone, staring at the blank wall. His thoughts raced in every direction, each one more overwhelming than the last. "I don't know how to stop this," he whispered, his voice trembling. The tension in his chest had only grown, making it hard to breathe. "If I can't focus, I'll never understand what the master is teaching me." His hands gripped the edges of his robes, pulling them tighter, as if trying to hold on to something solid. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm not meant to find peace." Mark shut his eyes, trying to center himself, but the internal noise refused to quiet. The silence in the room seemed louder than ever. In that moment, Mark realized how much of his struggle came from his own fear of failure. Every time he tried to force an answer, it slipped further away. Mark walked through the temple garden later, the weight of his inner struggle still heavy. The words of the mentor echoed in his mind. Let go of your desire for control. It was harder than Mark had ever imagined. What does it mean to let go? He thought, his mind churning with uncertainty. He paused near a stone bench, looking at the trees and flowers around him, their stillness mocking his chaos. I'm doing everything wrong, Mark murmured. The world around him seemed to move on, oblivious to his struggles. A breeze stirred the leaves, but Mark felt no peace from it. He had been taught to believe that meditation, discipline, and effort would bring him peace, but now he realized that his approach had been flawed. He was so focused on doing it right that he had lost sight of simply being. As the sun set, Mark sat near the temple steps, watching the sky change color. He felt the exhaustion of the day weighing on him, both physically and emotionally. The mentor's words seemed to echo from afar. You must let go. Mark had spent so much time trying to push himself into peace that he had never realized how much he was resisting the very thing he sought. I don't know how to let go, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He closed his eyes, feeling the cool evening air on his skin, and for the first time in days, allowed himself to just be. It wasn't the answer he was looking for, but in that moment, it was enough. He let the weight of his thoughts rest, knowing that finding peace would take time. For now, he could rest in the quiet of the evening, trusting that he was at least on the right path. Mark stood on the temple steps, looking out over the serene landscape. The Zen master's words rang in his ears. You were never broken, Mark, only deceived by your attachment to perfection. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. All this time, he had thought that his struggle was necessary, that his failure was proof of something missing. But now, a deeper truth was beginning to surface. I've been holding on to the illusion of perfection, Mark murmured to himself, the realization dawning on him like a weight lifting off his shoulders. The Zen master's cryptic words were clearer now. The suffering Mark had experienced wasn't a punishment. It was the result of his obsession with an unattainable ideal. He had believed that peace would come through perfect practice, perfect meditation, and perfect control. But the truth was simpler. Peace was already within him, waiting to be uncovered. Mark closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. The truth, so long hidden, was now laid bare before him. The Zen master approached quietly, his footsteps soft on the stone floor. You were never broken, Mark, he said again, his voice a calm reminder of what had been spoken. What you thought was your failure was only the illusion of your attachment. Mark turned to face him, his eyes filled with questions. But if I wasn't broken, why did it feel so real? Why did it hurt so much? The Zen master smiled softly. The pain you felt was real, but the story you told yourself about that pain was not. It was an illusion created by your attachment to perfection. Mark paused, absorbing the weight of this. But how do I stop clinging to this idea of perfection? He asked, his voice almost pleading. The Zen master's gaze softened, and he replied, You don't stop clinging, you simply let go. You realize that perfection was never the goal, peace was always within you. Mark's heart beat faster, the words beginning to take root in his soul. He had spent so long chasing something outside of himself, not realizing that the answer had always been inside. Mark spent the next several days reflecting in solitude, trying to understand what had been revealed to him. His mind was filled with thoughts of all the years he had spent trying to force enlightenment, trying to earn peace. I've been living under a lie, he said quietly, standing at the temple's edge, looking out over the rolling hills. He had built his entire spiritual journey around the belief that there was something wrong with him, something that needed to be fixed. The master's words kept echoing in his mind. You were never broken. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and Mark could see clearly for the first time. The suffering he had experienced was not a reflection of his inability to practice correctly, but the result of his attachment to a false belief. Mark sighed, feeling a shift within himself. What now? He asked aloud. The answer, though not yet fully clear, seemed closer than ever before. He no longer needed to search for perfection. He needed only to accept the peace that had always been within him. The Zen master appeared beside Mark, his footsteps soundless on the stone. What do you see now, Mark? He asked, his voice carrying an unexpected softness. Mark looked at him, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. "I see that I was never broken," he said, his voice steady, a calmness now filling his chest. "I see that all my pain came from clinging to something that wasn't real." The master nodded, his eyes filled with quiet approval. "Good. But remember, seeing the truth is not the end, it is the beginning. Now, you must live it." Mark nodded slowly, his heart lighter. "I've spent so much time chasing something that was never meant to be caught," he reflected. "But now, I understand. I don't have to chase peace. It's already here." The master's expression softened into a rare smile. "Exactly. Peace was always within you. You just had to let go of the illusion to find it." Mark stood before the temple door, the last remnants of daylight fading as the night approached. "I thought peace was something I had to earn," Mark said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "But now I know it's always been here, waiting for me to stop searching." The Zen master's voice reached him from behind. "Peace does not require effort, Mark. It only requires recognition." Mark turned to face him, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "I understand now," he said. "I've been seeking in the wrong direction." The master nodded, his expression calm but knowing. "The path was never outside of you. It was always within." Mark looked out at the darkening sky, the stars beginning to emerge. For the first time in years, he felt no need to search. He was exactly where he needed to be. Mark knelt on the cold stone floor of the temple, his hands pressed firmly to the earth. "I can't do it anymore," he whispered, his voice breaking. The weight of his emotions felt like a heavy burden, suffocating him. "I give up," he said, as tears welled in his eyes. The battle he had fought within himself had drained him completely. He had spent years searching, striving, fighting for something that seemed always out of reach. But now, in this moment of total despair, he felt something shift deep inside him. It wasn't an answer, nor was it the peace he had always chased. It was a release. He surrendered completely, allowing himself to let go of the pursuit, of the struggle. In that surrender, there was something unexpected. A moment of profound clarity. "I don't need to find it," Mark thought. "It's already here." The stillness that had eluded him for so long suddenly enveloped him, and in that moment he realized that the true path was not one of effort, but of acceptance. As Mark sat there, completely still, something began to shift within him. A calmness spread through his chest, gently lifting the burden he had carried for so long. His breath slowed, and for the first time, it felt natural, effortless. He no longer fought his thoughts, nor did he seek to control them. "It's not about fixing myself," Mark realized, his voice barely a whisper. "It's about allowing what is already there." The realization settled over him like a warm embrace, and his body relaxed. The tension he had been carrying for so long evaporated, replaced by an undeniable sense of peace. The clarity was undeniable. It wasn't a loud, triumphant moment. It was quiet, gentle, almost unnoticed. But it was real. "I am whole," Mark thought. A simple yet profound truth. I don't need to be fixed. I just need to be. Mark opened his eyes slowly, as if seeing the world for the first time. The temple, once filled with doubt and confusion, now felt like a sacred space of understanding. It was always here, he thought, his heart swelling with gratitude. The path he had been so desperate to find was not somewhere out there waiting for him. It was within him all along. The Zen master's words rang in his mind. The answer is always within. Mark stood slowly, feeling the solidity of the ground beneath his feet, the foundation of his journey finally clear. "I don't need to search anymore," he thought, his voice steady and calm. The external world, which had once seemed so loud and distracting, now felt like a mirror reflecting his newfound stillness. With every breath, Mark felt more deeply connected to the truth of who he was. He didn't need to achieve anything. Peace had always been there within him. Mark walked through the temple courtyard, the wind gently brushing against his skin. The rustling of the leaves in the trees was no longer a distraction. It was part of the same quiet rhythm that now filled him. This is it, Mark thought, a quiet smile forming on his lips. This is peace. He had spent so many years searching for something that could only be found by letting go. He had fought so hard for control, only to realize that peace couldn't be grasped, it could only be allowed. The journey wasn't about achieving a destination. It was about embracing the present moment. I don't need to be anyone else, Mark thought. I just need to be myself. The world around him felt more vibrant, more alive than ever before. He no longer felt like he was chasing something, but rather simply being. As Mark stood at the temple's entrance, looking out at the horizon, he felt a deep sense of completion. The journey he had been on, full of struggles, doubts, and frustrations, had led him to this moment of clarity. I am not lost, he whispered to himself, his voice filled with quiet strength. I am here. The realization was simple, but it carried the weight of everything he had been through. The world around him, the sky above, the earth beneath his feet, they all felt different now, as if he was seeing them with new eyes. His heart was no longer burdened by the search for meaning. He had found it. It was always here, in the present moment. The journey, he now realized, was never about reaching a destination, but about realizing that he was always exactly where he needed to be. Mark stood at the edge of the temple grounds, looking out over the vast expanse before him. His heart felt light, free from the weight it had carried for so long. I used to think that peace was something to fight for, something to earn, he reflected quietly. But now, I understand that peace has always been here. It was never about the struggle, but about allowing myself to be still. The wind rustled the leaves, a gentle reminder of the constant movement of life. Mark smiled softly. He had spent so long chasing an ideal, but now he realized that peace was not something to find, it was something to recognize. With each passing moment, he felt more connected to the world around him, no longer trying to control it, but simply experiencing it. The temple, the trees, the sky, everything felt whole. I am at peace just as I am, he whispered to himself, the truth sinking deep into his soul. Mark slowly walked through the temple gardens, his feet carrying him effortlessly along the familiar stone path. The struggle is over, he thought, the words a gentle realization. His footsteps felt lighter, as though the burdens he had carried for so long had been lifted. The gentle rustle of the leaves above and the sound of birds in the distance filled the air, but they no longer felt like distractions. Instead, they were part of the peace he had found within himself. Mark paused beside a small, tranquil pond. The water reflected the sky above, clear and still. I don't need to seek any longer, he mused. Everything is as it should be. The thought settled in him like a wave of calm, and for the first time, he felt no urge to search for something beyond this moment. Everything he had ever needed was already here, already within him. As Mark continued his walk through the temple grounds, he reflected on everything he had learned. I no longer need to force myself to become something I'm not, he thought. I've realized that peace comes from within, and it is always available, even in the midst of chaos. The path ahead seemed endless, but for the first time Mark didn't feel anxious about it. The uncertainty of the future no longer felt like a threat, but an opportunity. He had stopped searching for something outside of himself, and now embraced the present moment. I am not defined by my past struggles, he realized, but by my ability to let go and be here now. The realization filled him with gratitude. The peace he sought was not something to achieve. It was already here, in the acceptance of what was. Later that evening, Mark sat by the temple's stone fountain, watching the water ripple softly. The moon had risen, and its light shimmered on the water's surface. I used to think that enlightenment was a destination, a goal to be reached, he thought. But now I understand that it's a process, an ongoing unfolding, one moment at a time. Mark closed his eyes, the gentle sound of the water calming him. It's not about seeking perfection or answers, it's about embracing the present moment, just as it is. The realization settled into his soul, deep and peaceful. He didn't need to change or fix anything, he simply needed to live with acceptance and mindfulness. The quiet serenity of the night surrounded him, and Mark felt more connected than ever before, to the world, to others, and to himself. The following morning, Mark stood at the temple's entrance, looking out at the horizon as the sun began to rise. This is the beginning, not the end, he thought, a soft smile on his lips. He had learned to accept the journey, with all its twists and turns, and now he could embrace the future without fear. I don't need to chase anything, Mark realized. I simply need to walk the path before me, with peace and presence. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a perfect reflection of his internal transformation. He felt no rush, no need to be anywhere but here. Mark took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh morning air. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he didn't need to worry about what was ahead. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Mark stood at the edge of the temple, gazing at the peaceful horizon. He whispered to himself, "I am not lost, I am here." In this moment, the world around him felt clear, and the noise of life had faded into the background. His heart was still, knowing he had found his way. As Mark stood there, a soft breeze swept through the temple courtyard, and he closed his eyes, feeling the world around him, as if it were part of his own being. I don't need to search anymore, he realized. The stillness he had longed for wasn't an end, but a beginning. His journey was not about a final destination, but the quiet path that led to acceptance. It's all here now, Mark thought. The sound of the temple bell rang softly in the distance, symbolizing the continuity of his journey, now peaceful and complete. There was no longer a need to struggle for peace. It had always been there, inside him. As Mark walked back into the temple, the quiet of the space felt like a soft embrace. This is my home now, he thought. The peaceful rhythm of life no longer felt like a quest, but simply the way things were. He had found his place, both in the temple and in his heart. No more striving, no more pushing, only being. Mark stopped in the center of the temple, taking in the stillness around him. I am here, not searching, not striving, he thought, a sense of deep acceptance filling his being. His mind, once a whirlwind of questions, now felt like calm waters. The teachings, the journey, all had led to this moment of quiet awareness. This is the peace I've sought right here in the present moment. Mark stood in the temple doorway, watching the sun set once more. I am not lost, he whispered, as the golden light bathed the landscape. I am home, just as I am. The journey had brought him full circle, not to a place of answers, but to a place of understanding. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the world bathed in twilight. Mark's journey was far from over, but he no longer needed to chase it. He was here in the moment, and that was enough.